Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, hello and welcome back to the podcast. This is the second solo episode of 2026, and right now it's January. There are a lot of fitness resolutioners that are probably starting their fitness journey or maybe restarting it, and many people are focused on fat loss. So I decided that I am going to dedicate this and probably a couple of future solo episodes to helping you start your next fat loss diet in the best way. And I've noticed that most people ask, what is the best diet for me? And I am going to answer that question in a future podcast. But not enough people ask, am I ready to diet? And I believe that that is a fundamental question, and that is why I want to dedicate this whole episode to it. In fact, I already had an episode on this very question, and that was episode 97, titled, Are You Ready to Diet? However, in that episode, I covered some factors to think about, to consider whether you are indeed ready to take on a fat loss diet successfully, that were primarily mindset and motivation based. Whereas here, in this episode, I want to cover some skills that you need to master, or at least improve upon or get started with before you start your fat loss phase proper. And that's what I would consider being ready for a diet. To me, a client is ready to commence a fat loss phase when they tick the majority, if not all, of the boxes that I'm going to cover in this episode. And we're going to talk about 6 different skills that I help my clients develop. But before I get into those, importantly, you don't have to be perfect about all of these skills, because if you were, you probably already have the physique that you want and you wouldn't need to diet in the first place. However, I think that spending 2 to 4 weeks improving upon the skills I'm going to talk about and forging this fat loss resilient mindset before you begin your fat loss phase proper is going to pay dividends. Because as a result of doing this, you'll start feeling like you know what you're doing, which will make results happen faster, which will make you feel more motivated, which means that you'll be consistent and keep the results coming. And you can then continue to improve on these 6 skills during the fat loss phase itself. But continuing to improve is far easier than starting from scratch. And that's why all my new clients with a fat loss goal start with a fat loss primer phase, during which we work exactly on what I'm going to cover in this podcast. I strongly believe that this fat loss primer phase is one of the many reasons that makes so many of my clients successful. And that's why I've decided to share its main tenets with you in this episode to help you start 2026 successfully. And if you want to be even more successful this year, shameless plug coming, you can sign up for online coaching with me via the link in the show notes. And now, without further ado, let's start with the first skill. So my clients are ready to start a fat loss phase when they're tracking their food consistently and accurately enough. Very few people can diet without tracking, and all of them learned by tracking their fat loss phases for multiple years. And if you're new, or if you're attempting a fat loss diet for the first time after a long time, you're not one of those people. So you're going to need to track your food in some way. Tracking in itself is a skill, and it takes practice to become consistent, to track everything honestly instead of only tracking the good food, and to learn how to estimate your calories and macros, assuming you choose calorie and macro tracking as your tracking tool of choice when you are eating out and you don't have a scale handy. You could practice this while you are in a deficit, for sure, but I do think it's more efficient and more productive to start sooner than that and to have at least a couple of weeks of tracking under your belt before you enter the deficit phase proper. The second skill that my clients have by the time we start a fat loss phase is they have practice having a flexible meal structure, which means two things. Number one, they eat the same number of meals and snacks most days, and number two, they eat at regular times most days. Importantly, what flexible means to you depends on your lifestyle. For instance, if you do shift work, you may have two different meal structures, a work structure and a non-work structure, or even three, a day shift structure, a night shift structure, and an off day structure, and that's absolutely fine. In addition to that, holidays can be more freestyle, but that's because they're only temporary. On average, the majority of the time, you are going to want to have some form of a predictable, flexible meal structure that you can adhere to most of the time. The third skill that my clients develop is they learn to make mainly, not only, goal-aligned food choices. Because you could diet on nothing but Twinkies, and there's actually a nutrition professor that did this as an experiment and lost, I believe, 27 pounds. But you are not going to feel good if you're only or primarily eating highly palatable foods. You're going to be hungry and you're going to have far less energy than if you were feeding yourself the right amount of protein, fiber, health-promoting dietary fat, vitamins, and minerals. Obviously, there is room for the odd pizza or the odd burger and fries, but again, on average, your eating habits should do more than just promote fat loss by keeping you in a deficit. They should boost your well-being as well. Because when you are feeling good, everything is easier, including sticking to your fat loss plan. The fourth skill, or rather in this case it's more of a frame of mind that my clients develop during the fat loss primer phase, is that they understand or learn to embrace the fact that fat loss is only one of the many phases in their fitness journey, which means essentially four different things. Number one, they're willing to take breaks from the deficit instead of dragging ass until they're happy with their weight, because they're almost always going to burn out before they're happy with their weight, if that's their approach. It's way easier to transition back to dieting after a restorative deficit break, where you practice maintaining your results intentionally, than it is to transition back to dieting after a frustrating burnout. Second, they're willing to make compromises. They're willing to meal plan and prep more, to be more active, to eat out less, to choose lower calorie options at least some of the time when they're eating out, to eat fewer highly palatable foods, to drink less alcohol and less liquid calories in general, and when they want to have higher calorie options when eating out, they are willing to save calories for that occasion. Third, they're ready to take on the consequences of being in a deficit for a prolonged period of time. And these include, but they're not limited to necessarily, more hunger, slightly less energy, and a bit more food noise. Of course, these consequences are not going to ambush you all at once on day 2 of the fat loss phase, but you can expect that they're going to gradually creep up the longer you diet for, and you are willing to face them as they come. Last but not least, my clients are not entering a fat loss phase thinking that it's going to be interminable, because this is how you feel when you decide to diet without a plan or an end in sight. And it was definitely how I felt as an overweight teenager when I committed to my first ever weight loss diet. And I can tell you, it's pretty fucking unpleasant. No wonder most people quit, which is why this point is so crucial. Embracing the phasic nature of fat loss is crucial to success. The fifth skill, or rather frame of mind to embrace, is the idea that fat loss is self-improvement or self-care, whichever you prefer, not self-punishment. Even if you're not happy about your physique or the choices that led you to it, you're not trying to hate yourself into a smaller body. Doing that may motivate you for 3 months, maybe 6, but longer? Well, good fucking luck with that. And the final skill that I help my clients develop before we get into the deficit or before we get into the fat loss phase proper is the skill of becoming consistent or staying consistent, if they already are, with lifting weights, doing enough steps, and doing enough cardio. So if a client is a beginner, they will be working up to doing more movement gradually at a pace that suits them. On the other hand, if they're already experienced, doing all of this may be almost second nature to them by now already. Either way, when they're developing this skill, they'll be actively focusing on increasing their physical activity or maintaining their current level of physical activity at a pace that makes sense relative to their experience. So these are all the skills that I believe you want to be focusing on for at least 2 to 4 weeks before starting a fat loss phase proper in order to answer the question, am I ready to diet, with a resounding yes. Having said that, I also want to point out that when I'm walking a client through a fat loss primer phase, this does not necessarily mean that we are not angling for a deficit already. For example, the first week of coaching, they may simply be focusing on learning how to track what they're already eating without attempting to achieve a calorie deficit or to hit a particular calorie goal. But from week number 2 already, I may start to introduce a calorie goal that, if they achieve it, is going to induce a deficit. The difference between the fat loss primer phase and the fat loss phase itself that follows the primer is that in the primer phase, the main focus is skill development rather than losing body fat. But that doesn't mean that losing body fat may not occur. With that, that is a wrap for today's solo episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, if you could leave a 5-star rating, or if your platform allows it and you're happy to do it, a written review, that would be amazing. It would really help the podcast reach more people. Thank you so much for giving me some of your time today, and I am looking forward to talking to you next time. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.